After storming to victory at Minecon, the Allay is finally in Minecraft. He's cool, he's cute, plus he'll even work for you, and he'll do it for free. You're going to see a lot of these guys around from now on because they're super handy for sorting your items. Because I think these are such a fun new addition, today we're going to go over 5 ideas on how to make the Allay even better. So subscribe if you like what you see. I am of course Simply Sark, and let's look at some extra things the Allay could do. So something really awesome about Allays is they can filter unstackable items, which is something even hoppers can't do. A little bit annoyingly though, I'd kind of hoped they'd be able to differentiate between stuff like enchanted and unenchanted items. The thing is though, if you give an Allay a sword and he sees a sword on the ground and this sword has Smite 1, he will pick up this sword. Depending on what you're trying to do, that could be useful behavior, but on the other hand, that might be kind of annoying. So I actually thought it would be a cool idea if the player had a little bit more control on how the Allay behaves and what he can and can't pick up. The good news is I actually think there's quite a simple, and if I do say so myself, elegant solution to this problem. So the idea is if you give the Allay a shulk box or a bundle, if this item contains other items, the Allay can pick up all the items. For example, let's say you've got a mob farm and you want to take just the gunpowder and spider eyes and put them in your potion chest. If you gave the Allay a bundle and you put a piece of gunpowder and a spider eye inside, he can now pick up both those items at the same time and ignore the bones, rotten flesh and the string. This way you only need one Allay to do the job, and you have way more control to customize the Allay's behavior depending on your specific situation. So, the Allay and the Vex are clearly related. The Vex is probably some kind of corrupted version of the Allay. For that reason, I'd really like to see a bit more visual consistency between the two mobs. Obviously, they're not supposed to be exactly the same, but it feels like they're using two different style guidelines. Personally, I actually think the Allay has a better design to it. I've never really been that fond of the Vex, mostly because I don't think they really iterated on its design enough. Looks basically just like a standard Steve model with a so-so texture slapped on top, and they called it a day. I would love if the Vex got a second look and had its design brought closer to the Allays. That said, I think the Allay is actually a little bit too low res, whereas the Vex is probably too high res. So maybe bump the Allay up in resolution a bit and bring the Vexes down at the same time. Like I said, they shouldn't look exactly the same and there should be differences, but I definitely think when you put them side by side, they don't visually match in the way I reckon they should. Allays are clearly very valuable mobs. Everyone is going to want a couple in their base or to follow them around, but the problem is they're also very vulnerable mobs. One of the main ways we're going to be using Allays is to join us on our caving expeditions and picking up stuff like ores and blocks we missed. The thing is though, if you imagine yourself and your Allays down in the caves, there is an infinite amount of ways those little guys are going to meet their untimely demise. This is going to be frustrating because they're quite rare, hard to get a hold of, and you're inevitably going to lose them in annoying ways. That's why I think there ought to be a way to keep them safe from dying, getting stolen or lost, plus also an easier way to relocate them over long distances. So how about this? Similar to how you can put mobs like fish, axolotls and tadpoles in buckets, what if you could store Allays in books? It would essentially work the same way. I just thought, given Allays are sort of like magical spirits, it might be a bit more appropriate and dignified than being in a bucket. To go a step further though, I thought you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone and revitalize an older, unloved feature. Instead of just using a regular book, what if to capture an Allay, you had to use an enchanted book with Curse of Binding? Curses are one of those features they never really did much with, and outside of pranking, there is basically zero reason you would ever be happy finding an enchanted book with a curse on it. This way, it's a little more expensive to capture Allays, and it repurposes an older feature. Think about it. If you found a book with Curse of Binding, it goes from being a disappointment to a really useful item for when you find an Allay. So how exactly is that going to keep your Allays out of harm's way? Well, basically, if you capture an Allay, release it, and that Allay goes on to perish, instead of dying and being lost forever, What if that allay actually just poofed out of existence and its soul returned safely to the book it was bound to, on the condition the book is still in your inventory? This way, you can confidently use allays the way they're supposed to be used, but also know you're not going to lose what is quite a valuable mob to some silly mistake. If you play around with allays for more than 5 minutes, you'll very quickly notice something. They are actually pretty annoying. They fly around randomly, and even if you give them an item, they're just going to swarm around you for all eternity. I definitely think there needs to be a way to make them sit still and basically just stay in an area without wandering off and getting lost. There's also something I think we'd all love to see in Minecraft, but for whatever reason, they haven't added it yet. Though I think that allay might be an opportunity to finally add it in a way that fits into survival. I've always wanted to be able to display items in the world like how you can do with invisible armor stands, but that's obviously a creative only thing. So how about this? What if you could make an allay sit still, a side effect is they actually faded out and turned invisible? This is textbook ghost behavior, right? It makes total sense. The result is being able to make the allay sit still, but then a byproduct is you now also have a mechanic where you can display the item it's holding, which opens a whole world for decoration. Also, if we're using the curse of binding to store allays in books, maybe a curse of vanishing is how to make the allay sit still and turn invisible. Of course, you still need to be able to find the allay, so maybe he should give off some subtle particle effect to show you where he's hiding. I actually really like how they've made allays spawn. You can find them in both pillager outpost cages or in the prison cells in woodland mansions. This is such a great way to do it because for a long time, and especially since they added raids, woodland mansions have been sitting around pretty pointlessly without a real reason to visit them. That's why this is a tricky question. Should allays be finite or should they be renewable? For me, I definitely think they should be finite. It's finally given a use to mansions, and allays are a pretty powerful tool. Should they be cheap? On the other hand, I totally get that if you're on a server, finite resources can be a bit unfair once everyone's depleted everything. So while I think they should be finite, if they were renewable, how would that work in practice? I don't really much like the idea of breeding them, but I definitely think this should have something to do with Vex, because they're infinitely renewable and just seem like the obvious choice. As we've speculated, Vex are probably just corrupted allays, so maybe to create new allays, you've got to heal Vexes somehow. But how would that work? So apparently, allay is actually a real word. I didn't know this. It means to diminish or put at rest. On the other hand, Vex means to make someone feel annoyed, frustrated, or worried. So how about this? Allays really like note blocks and music. So maybe the way to soothe a Vex is to play some music, get rid of all the anger and calm it down. How do you make music? Note blocks? Yes, but probably too much hassle for the average player. Fortunately, there is actually a block that lets you make music without knowing anything about songwriting. Amethyst. Have you ever noticed how when you place or walk on Amethyst, it kind of procedurally generates a nice little tune, and it somehow always sounds really good. It's super cool, and I think it'd be a great opportunity to give Amethyst a proper use. Basically, the idea here is if a Vex hears you placing or walking on amethyst blocks nearby, you'll entrance it. You've begun the process. The more blocks you place and the longer your tune goes on for, the closer you get to converting the Vex. Eventually, with enough time and a long enough song, the Vex will give in and turn back into an allay. I like this idea because it's music related and it gives amethyst a real use. Plus, because you'll need like a whole stack of amethyst blocks to make a song long enough, it creates a real incentive to create a geode farm because you're going to need a fair bit. But these were just some of the ideas I had. At the moment, quite early days, so I'm sure we'll see lots of tweaks and changes as they develop this new feature further. With these ideas, I tried to not only tweak the allay, but also think of new uses for other features like bundles, cursors, and amethyst. Let me know what you think of allays. Is there anything you'd change? And what kind of impact do you think they'll have on the game? Either way, thanks once again for tuning in. I've been your Simply Sark, and I'll catch you later. Maybe in a year or two. Not decided yet.